Welcome, everyone, to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Cheng, and joining me, as always, is my boy, Rudy Tamarchio. Rudy, we have entered the month of November, and the stakes could not be higher. The fifth-ranked Miami Hurricanes welcome the Duke Blue Devils into Hard Rock Stadium for the inaugural, what I'm calling the Croqueta Bowl, or should we call it the
Lo
Pastelito Bowl?
croquetazo.
The Crocatazo, exactly. I haven't decided yet, but Manny Diaz is coming back. Rudy, how does Miami come out of this game after that rivalry win and play a team they are expected to beat?
I think they have this game circled in their calendar just like the way Manny Diaz had this game circled in their calendar because it's one of those where it's a great defense. There's going to be a lot of blitzing, a lot of exotic looks. And I think it's a team that they haven't taken lightly because you could see what they do. I mean, look, they lost to SMU last week and they forced 6 turnovers in the process. So it's just one of those where I think it's a great teaching moment to show you could do all the right things on defense and still lose this game. So every game is a crapshoot at this point out. All they got to do is just keep winning to stay in it.
Just win, baby, win. Yeah, the Hurricanes are favored by 21 points. It's the 21st meeting for Miami, who leads the series 15-5. As we've been talking about, Manny Diaz is making his first return since being fired as the coach. Again, I think what people are going to be talking about is this Manny versus Mario rivalry. But I love the way Manny put it. He's like, the same man can't cross the same river twice, because it's the man's different when he comes back and the river's different. And I think that is the truest statement for our program. We are not the same program that Manny left. There are so many different faces. I think we're a way better team. We're a different culture from what Manny had. Not to say that, like, Manny was all bad, but I do believe there was a culture issue in the locker room the entire time. And so it's, to me, I think it's going to be nice to see how do we stack up, because here's the other thing I'm kind of worried about is Manny really likes to blitz, and he is really good at bringing pressure. So it's like that we saw in the FSU game. We saw it a little bit in the Virginia Tech game and a little bit in the Cal game, where when is pressured, the O line tends to bend a little bit, not fully break. But, we had 4 sacks against FSU. We had a handful of sacks in the Virginia Tech game. And so I think Manny's going to come ready, guns blazing. Duke has lost the last 21 straight games versus an AP top five. So that's kind of in our favor. And Miami's averaging right now 33.5 points per game in this series, which is the highest against any ACC team. So I'm just wondering, how do you think we're going to fare against the Blitz? Or do you think Manny kind of switches it up?
I don't think. Look, if you watch Manny Diaz the way he's coached when he was either a defensive coordinator at Texas or if he's at Miami first as a defensive coordinator, then as a head coach, how he ran Penn State's defense, Manny is who Manny is. It's going to be the same style of defense. The one thing that I think is interesting is, being Miami Hurricanes fans and watching the team under his tutelage. I think one thing that we noticed a lot of is when the defense is clicking, it's great, but when the defense is not working very well, it could be kind of a liability in terms of how you attack it. One thing that every team was pretty successful at doing, if they were to exploit that defense, was really kind of throwing over the pressure, throwing in the direction of the pressure. That's what they teach you to do. But if you see so many exotic looks, I don't think they're going to be disguising coverages that much because, as well as they are a pretty good man coverage team, I think the best defenses in terms of what the secondaries look like, it's already past Miami until they play like a Clemson in the ACC championship game should they win out. So in terms of that, I'm not. I don't know. I mean, when you watch this team, I'm not too worried anymore because I think what you learned about Florida State was it wasn't the sexiest win, but Miami can win any way they want you to.
That's true.
Florida State was the first team to say, "We dare you to throw on us," and every team before that was, "We dare you to run on us."
Yeah.
So I think they find a way to adjust, and I don't think there's really a moment where they can get too far behind. And hopefully, I say that as not famous last words.
Yeah, I mean, we come in as a 21-point favorite. I think it's going to be closer than that. Duke has the fourth best coverage grade in all of college football. They're number 20 in points allowed with 18.6 points per game. Miami's number 41 with 21.5 points per game. A statistic that I also thought was a little bit kind of wonky, but like I was like, okay, that's very interesting. 21 forced turnovers with 19 takeaways. So when they get when they first a turnover, they're usually getting it back. So I'm just like sitting here, and I don't think, again, I'm not worried. I think we're going to win this game. But what I do worry about is how, because we're going to get into it later in the show. It's how does the playoff committee see this, right? If they see us playing a challenging game, and here's the thing that I just kind of irks me. I've been hearing it all week, but I've been hearing it, grumblings throughout the season when people mention Miami. It's like Miami has the weakest schedule, and it's like I don't know if you can really talk about the strength of schedule when you look at other major programs right now, and they're struggling too because of injury. I mean, luckily, I mean, knock on wood, we don't have that many major injuries, but I mean, we're going to get into some games happening around the country this weekend where people are missing their starting quarterbacks, they're missing linemen, crucial linemen that are taking away major facets of their game. And so to me, I would just it'll be interesting to see how Miami responds coming off that win against FSU. I wouldn't say it was emotional, but it was nice to break the streak. It was nice to get a definitive win against your rival. Again, we'll reiterate it. We said it in our recap. Mario pounding the table, talking about the trajectory of our program compared to the other Florida programs. So there's been a lot of, I would say, auxiliary emotion coming out of the locker room this past week, and I just hope that they can lock it in and focus, and that way we cannot play too close. Because again, my fear is noon game, Duke. You know what I mean? Like, are we going to lay an egg the first half and then come out guns blazing in the second half, or are we going to put the pedal to the metal right off the rip and just put these guys to bed by halftime? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea of a noon game for this one, just because of the weather's not going to play too much of a factor. Given that it should be nice and beautiful without all the humidity, but if there's extra heat, that's only going to benefit Miami versus being down here in South Florida instead of coming down from North Carolina where it's starting to get cold this time
Yeah.
of the year. And then
It,
back to the whole strength of schedule thing. I mean, let's let's be honest. Most of the teams, with the exception of like Ohio State, who lost to Oregon, who is now number one, how many of those teams really lost to what was one of the tougher teams on their schedules?
yeah.
Alabama dropped their first game to Vanderbilt. Tennessee lost their first game to Arkansas, who's not having a great time this year. You just go down that list. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Is it really the strength of the schedule, or is it just not coming up to play every single week? And at the end of the day, if you're playing in a Power Four conference, and if you're one of those fringe group of five, top of the top of the heap teams, you could still lose on any given day in college football right now because we've been talking about it all year. You don't have the same depth, 2 and 3 and 4 deep in some cases. So
Yeah, no,
that's this landscape.
and we talked about, I mean, it's so funny. We talked about it a few weeks ago about the depth issue because of the transfer portal and NIL. And we're seeing it now as we enter this week one. And so around the country, we have some important conference clashes that could determine paths to their respective championships, but also derail paths to the playoffs. So, first up in the ACC, we have Pitt heading to Dallas to take on SMU. Which of these ACC dark horses is keeping their playoff hopes alive, Rudy?
I got Pitt. I have Pitt only because I think they're the more physical team. I think they play better defense. And don't get me wrong, SMU has been playing lights out. They've had a great year. They only had one stumble out of conference, so it doesn't hurt them in this chance against BYU, who was another physical team. And while I don't think Pitt's as physical as BYU has been, they're kind of getting back to their old reputation of kind of being like that giant killer and playing sound defense. So I think they pull that one out.
Yeah, I think what's interesting in this is both quarterbacks, Eli Holstein and Kevin Jennings, are both questionable for this game. And so it's a matter of who's going to have their quarterback realistically. Because I think both of these, I'll get into some statistics in this. Both of these teams are very even keeled. They're 3 and 4 respectively in the ACC in offensive production, and I'll get into that. But it's like if Pitt is missing Eli Holstein, I'm not sure they're really going to stand the chance. That they've been a very high powered offense all season because of him. But I just wonder this late in the game, how does that impact Pitt if they don't have their starting QB? On the inverse end, if SMU doesn't have Kevin Jennings, I think, you know, they could do better. I mean, they've luckily seen some success with Preston Stone, who's their backup quarterback, who threw for over 3,100 yards, nearly 3,200 yards, and 28 touchdowns as a team starting quarterback before suffering that season-ending injury against Navy last year. So they have, a backup guy in the stables ready to go, pun intended, with the ponies. Um, but it would be interesting to see, if they do end up getting Kevin Jennings back. how does he fare against that secondary who's coming off a super hot performance against Syracuse with 3 pick sixes? Shout out to the podcast. Um, and just I'm wondering, like, does that secondary for Pitt come out on fire again? Are they ready to like just whoop, 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 take it from Kevin Jennings, who also, threw his own picks against Duke? I think they had almost 6 turnovers in the Duke game. So it's going to be not only a battle of the quarterbacks, but I think it's also going to be a battle of these defenses.
There were 3 additional fumbles that happened in that game that they happened to hold on to also, so there could
Yeah.
have been as many as 9 turnovers in that game. I think what's interesting on the Kevin Jennings side for SMU, though, is that he's really the quarterback that got SMU back in stride because he wasn't the
Yeah.
starter against BYU when they struggled, and they looked awful in that game. I mean, I think they
Yeah.
put up, like, 17 points. I have to go back and check the score, but it
That
was
would be
obviously their
that
lowest
would be
production.
I'm fully convinced that would have been a completely different game if Kevin Jennings started that game.
100%.
Yeah.
So it's odd that SMU with that Rhett Lashley system. And again, that was a game last week where they just squeaked it out against Duke with all those turnovers and with 2 former, coaching colleagues facing each other for the first time. It's weird to see that kind of offense only rank, like third in the ACC right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, these two teams are two of the top offenses in the ACC. Pitt is number 3 in scoring and number 4 in yards, and SMU, respectively, is 4 and 5. So, I mean, we're talking about
Mhm.
two teams that are like have paper thin margins between the two of them. And again, I think it really is going to come down to two quick things: the who's their quarterbacks are, so who's starting, and I think if both lose their starting quarterbacks, I give the edge to SMU. But I think if Eli Holstein does come in, I give the edge to Pitt as well. So I'm with Pitt with you as well. But we're gonna have to see who comes out for Pitt on Saturday. But over in the SEC, fresh off their bye weeks, the Florida Gators hope to keep their hot hand going as they take on the Georgia Bulldogs in what could be Billy Napier's last game. Rudy, how does Billy keep his job this weekend?
He has to win. He's not. I don't. Here's the thing: is he going to keep his job this week or keep his job this season? Because I feel like it's kind of the handwriting's on the wall for the entire season. But if he's going to make it past this week, they have to win or they have to keep it close. Because I think you could the same way he kept it close. I'm trying to remember who they lost to. Wasn't it like LSU that they probably should have beaten right before their bye week? They
No,
played somebody really tough.
who? Georgia
No,
or
no,
Florida?
Tennessee. It was Tennessee. Florida. Florida
Oh,
played Tennessee up in
right.
Neyland and gave them one hell of a game. And that
Yes.
was one of those situations where it's like, well, are they starting to turn things around? Is it Tennessee still lingering from that Arkansas loss? And what they did, I honestly feel like they need to keep this game close. And look, the way Jordan's been playing, that's entirely possible.
Do you
Outside of that one performance against Texas on the road. So
so
it's a toss up.
so here's the thing. The Gators are 2 and 12 under Napier against ranked teams. Do you think
Yep.
if Billy keeps it close, he still stays safe, or do you think he has to outright win to keep his job?
Against Georgia and the cocktail party,
Hmm.
again, the handwriting's on the wall for the end of the season. But if they're going to keep riding with him right now, he just has to keep it close. I don't think he has to win.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Georgia on this one. Obviously, I mean, I think we both are gonna go Georgia, but it's just like
Yeah.
when you look at not just even the stats, but you just kind of look at the record. It is just like Georgia's won 3 in a row, and they've won 6 of the last 7 against the Gators. So it's like it's really not been a rivalry. It's been one sided very much, very much. And then you look, I mean, oh, it's like this. It's Florida secondary is so suspect. I mean, kind of like ours, and it hasn't seen a passing attack like Georgia since we played them, and we all remember how that went down. And so it's like you're looking at like it's like can Florida's like defense really like go with? I mean, Georgia's
For a
offense is also
half.
struggling. Yeah, I mean for a half, but I mean here's the other thing: Carson Beck is also struggling. You know what I mean? Like I mean, it's funny. Georgia's running back is Florida's former running back, Trevor Etienne, who left
Hmm.
the Gators because he was mad because he wasn't starting. He didn't want to start behind Montrell Johnson. Um, so it's interesting that the the Bulldogs can't get that running game going, which is forcing Beck to have to throw like 30 plus uh or more than that. I think he's throwing for at least 30 attempts a game the last like 3 or 4 games. And so it's going to be interesting to see if Florida's defense can kind of step up. But more importantly, I actually found this stat out. Florida needs to play with explosive plays. It's funny, they rank in the top 5 of SEC teams with plays over 50 yards. So if Florida can find a way to like get through Georgia's secondary and create some explosive plays, I don't think they're going to win. It'll be very much like our game against Duke, but I think they can keep it close. And like I said, it's been it's been a it's been a very one-dimensional offensive team for Georgia where they've just been passing. So I think if Florida knows, hey, let's just keep 4 down in the front, play solid, I think they can kind of keep Georgia at bay as opposed to doing what Georgia did to Clemson to Florida. I mean, and if they do, ugh, I don't know if Billy walks out of there. I don't know if he can stay the coach. It'll be brutal.
If it's ugly, his office is going to be unpacked and sent to Jacksonville waiting for him. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think at halftime they're gonna have a crew outside his office. Like, all right, do we just bust down the door now and start packing it up for him, or what's the deal? Because
Should we put in a basement because there are no basements for all those fans that are doing all these things? So yeah, like we'll go find the nearest basement in Jacksonville for you.
exactly, yeah, for real. Because I mean, that's probably where he's gonna find himself for a couple years. Because I don't know how you recover from this as oh, poor Billy, G5 Billy. Well, we move over to the Big 12, and finally we have a massive matchup in the Big 10 this weekend. The Ohio State Buckeyes travel to Happy Valley to take on the Nittany Lions of Penn State. Can James Franklin finally break the curse, Rudy, and get a much needed win over the Buckeyes?
No,
I didn't think so either.
straight up no. Like, look, I've been kind of doubting Penn State this entire season. They squeaked out that win at USC earlier. I still don't believe it. I think they'll probably make the playoff, but I don't think they're even going to make it to the Big Ten championship game. I think it's just going to be Oregon and Ohio State on a collision course, and there's a possibility of them playing possibly 3 times this year.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think Ohio State's going to win, but here's why I think it's going to be a knockdown drag out fight. So, You've got
Always is.
you got star QB Drew Aller hurt, and at the moment he's questionable. So again, another situation where a top 10 team or a top 25 team doesn't have their quarterback, and they're going into a major conference, but also playoff implicating game. Right? There's pressure on Penn State to finally get over the hump. Right? Um, but there's a chance, and here's where I'm going with this. Back in the Oregon game, Ohio State lost their starting left tackle, who was their stud. Since then, they've been playing kind of shuffle with their linemen, and they lost another tackle this past game against
Nebraska.
Nebraska.
Mhm.
And so now you have 2 linemen down. And again, remember we were talking about earlier this year and what we were just talking about a few minutes ago about depth. You're losing depth. And so what does that mean? We were talking about it a few shows ago for those of you who've been following us, where are the battles won? In the trenches, right? And so again, you know, Penn State has a really nasty D line. They're really, really good. Um, and so I'm wondering, you've got a weakened Ohio State offensive line, and you've got a Penn State defensive line who's going to come be hungry. It's a noon kickoff, but it might as well be a whiteout at 8 o'clock. And so it's like, what's going to happen? And then what if Bo Pribula does have to step in? I mean, he stepped in against the Badgers and he was great. I mean, hit 85% of his throws for 98 yards, which is not a lot, but he got a touchdown. He runs well enough. He's got some legs on him, and it's a matter of can Ohio State get them off the field fast enough and then score fast enough on the offense. It's a very tricky thing that they're going to have to do, because when you have a mobile quarterback like that, it tends to leave your defense on the field, and that will wear you down. And like I said, you're already talking about a team that's hurt. So I think Penn State has a chance, you know. Um, it's probably not likely, but I just think when you have Jeremiah Smith as your wide receiver, and I just can't see him not getting at least two to three touchdowns this game. I think they're just going to constantly just bomb it because they can't run it because their O line's tough, which sucks because Ohio State has a pretty decent running back. Their
Mhm.
running back's pretty good. So I mean, Again, I think it's going to be one of those like ugly first halves where it might be like at max, I would say like 14-10, 17-10, something like that. And then we're going to see the separation in the second half. Both teams are coming off a bye. So again, with Drew Allard being hurt, maybe this week off, he gets better. Penn State's lost the last seven. Seven. It's two classes. I've never beat Ohio State. It's wild. The last we went through that, and that was traumatic for me when we lost to Florida State 7 times. So I feel for these guys, and it's so I think it's again come down to how does OSU's O line play against Penn State's D line, who is number 5 in rush defense. You know what I mean, and number 19 in pass defense. So we're going to have to wait and see. Well, the winners of these games know what's at stake. And as we enter the first week of November, that means the first rankings of the playoff selection committee are going to be released. ESPN recently released their favorites to make the playoff. Right now, Miami has the best odds with nearly 90% chance to make the dance. Rudy, are there any surprises here? Any teams you think fare better odds?
I mean, I'm looking at this list and there's nothing that's too surprising like in the top half. But when you start going down a little bit further and you're seeing like Tulane, UNLV still kind of in that picture after all that, coverage that we had earlier in the year with the NIL issues with their former starting quarterback. Those are kind of the two big shockers to me. But again, this is one of those things where you see the odds, all those Power Four conferences are going to at least get two, if not three teams into an expanded 12-team playoff. So outside of those, I'm not really too surprised. And, same thing with Army because they're still undefeated. They're going to have to play
That's
Navy,
true.
but Navy got pretty much eliminated by losing to Notre Dame in just stunning fashion last week. So, yeah, nothing too surprising on my end.
Yeah, I think the odds are pretty good. I think it's like we thought now that you've gotten a little bit of a history lesson, we thought we would put together Rudy and I because the playoff committee is going to be putting out their first batch of rankings this week coming up after this weekend. Rudy, do you want to go first with your prediction? Or do you want me to go first?
Up to you, because my explanation's a little, weirder in terms of what I think the playoff committee will do differently than when they had a 14 playoff. So if yours is more conventional, go with yours, and mine just kind of like the wild card.
Okay, so just to give you an explanation, I'm going to explain how I picked my teams, how I got to where I was getting. So here is where I put each of the teams. So the way I basically did this is I got super nerdy this week and I went through week 10, 11, and 12, and then the championship series. And I basically said, where do these teams stack up against each other and who will win? And so basically, I have Boise State at, well, I'll start from the top to the bottom because I think that's easier. So in my opinion, I think Oregon is going to outright win their season and win the championship. So in my mind, I think that the best odds and the best team to make the playoff is Oregon. I don't think they're going to lose. I don't see them losing. Next, I have Georgia in the SEC outright winning the rest of their games. Again, I'm not saying these are guaranteed, but in my to this moment, if you were like Chris, you have to pick today the teams and where they're going to go. These are where I'm picking them. So I think Georgia will outright win and win the SEC championship. In the third spot in the what do they call that again? In the third seed, I have Miami winning out because realistically, you just saw it. There's a 90% chance for us to win out, and I think we will also win the championship, the ACC championship. Now, I know some of you who are cheering for Clemson are going to say, "But Clemson is such a good team. What about Clemson?" I'm just going to say one quick thing. We beat Clemson last year with a freshman quarterback. Even if they got doubly better, we got exponentially better. And if you do the maths. There should be no reason why we lose to Clemson because again, we beat them with a freshman last year. So I'm pretty sure we're going to beat them this year if we meet them in Charlotte. Anyways, the fourth seed I have BYU because I do think BYU will win out in the Big 12. They'll stay undefeated and then they will beat who I presume will be Iowa State in the championship. I just don't see them stopping. They're a really powerful team and they've been going out. Now, here's where we get into the trickiness, right? Seeds 5 through 12, okay? So, what I think the playoff committee is going to do is they're going to take the loser of the SEC team of the SEC championship and they're going to put them in the 5th seed. So, I think Texas will win out but lose the conference championship, but like I said, the committee will show preference and reverence to the SEC loser and put them in the 5th seed. The same thing will occur with the loser of the Big 12 or Big 10 championship. So I think OSU will continue to win out their games as a win, like we said this weekend against Penn State, but lose in the conference championship. Now, the hard thing is I don't know how strong this will last because OSU is down those two O linemen we were talking about, and they're a little bruised and battered. So this could change. And I think, Rudy, we should probably do this every week, seeing how the teams go. Number
Absolutely.
7, I have Notre Dame because I think Notre Dame will win out the rest of their games. Their schedule is very manageable, and the voters love Notre Dame for whatever god awful reason. So I think they'll be the next in line for that 7th seed. They're going to be probably one of the better looking one loss teams, especially with that win over Texas A&M and Texas A&M looking as strong as they do. At number 8, I have Penn State sneaking in because they're going to lose this weekend most likely to Ohio State, which is going to push them out of the Big Ten championship. So they'll only have one loss, and hopefully they play close. That will give them some credence and credit to get in. And again, you've already got the Big Ten and the SEC championship runner-ups in there. So what would be next? Oh, look at these balloons. The Penn State Nittany Lions. Next, I have Clemson at number 9 because I think they will win out the season as well, but lose to Miami, like I mentioned, in the ACC championships. And it'll be hard to keep out Clemson, whose only 2 losses are to Georgia, which would be the SEC champion, and the ACC champion in Miami. At number 10, I have Tennessee, who I think will lose to Georgia in week 12 and only have 2 losses as well, and will be in similar position to Penn State, but in the SEC, and have them ranked at number 9 because of other losses that occur in the final 2 weeks. So we have to remember, just because you're ranked at a certain number doesn't mean you'll be seeded at a certain number. The rankings and the seedings will go into that. And then I have Texas A&M at 11 because I think their only loss for the remaining of the season will be the first one against Notre Dame, who we mentioned we have at number 7, and then we have the number 5 team or 5th seed team, which will be Texas. Those will be the only 2 losses, and I think they're going to play Texas relatively close. And then rounding us out, we have Boise State, the Group of 5 champion. I can't put them anywhere higher than 12 because there's just too many good teams that I think would just blow them out. So then when you get into those, that the first round, you'll have Boise State playing Texas. I think Texas will win that game to play BYU. Clemson playing Penn State. I think Clemson will beat Penn State to play Georgia. Texas will beat Texas A&M will beat Ohio. Ohio State will beat Texas A&M. Tennessee will beat Notre Dame. And then you get into the quarterfinals where I think Texas will make it to the semis. Georgia will beat out Clemson. I think we will get revenge for the Fiesta Bowl and beat out Ohio State. And I think Oregon will cruise past Tennessee, leaving the championship between Miami and Georgia. And of course, it's all about the U, baby. It's all about the U. What about you, Rudy? Let's see your uh your bracket. What do you got? How did you get to this?
So bear with me. I think the way that you put your bracket together is exactly the way that the committee has thought the last few years with only 4 teams. My thought is, given the state of college football this year and given how the competition has kind of shook itself out, I almost see the committee doing something different with an expanded 12-team playoff. So I have Oregon as the number 1 team because I think they're going to run the table and they're going to win the Big Ten. I also think they're going to beat Ohio State for the second time in the season. So that's why they're number 1, undefeated conference champion number 1. I put Miami at number 2 because they'll be also an undefeated conference champion. I have them meeting up against Clemson and Charlotte, beating Clemson, and because they're undefeated, they'll be number 2. I have Georgia at 3 because they'll be the SEC champion. They have 1 loss on their record, and I think that's where it's going to stay because I expect them to beat Texas A&M in the SEC championship game. BYU, I have it 4th as the Big 12 champion. I believe they'll be undefeated in conference as well. And that gets rid of your conference scheduling for your Power Four. And that's why I have them 1 through 4. From there, I'm thinking the committee is probably going to try to increase some competition by saying if you have good and a good independent, and Notre Dame, I think at this point, they had that 1 loss to NIU. I don't think they're dropping another game the rest of their season. They're going to end up at number 5. That's why I put them there because they'll be ranked higher than a 1 loss non conference champion or a 2 loss non conference champion. Boise State, I put at 6, not because I think they're the number 6 best team in the country. It's because they are the group of 5 highest ranked champion who's going to only have 1 loss to Oregon. So I think they run the table. And even though they're in the group of 5, they'll get a higher ranking because of their, record. I have Texas A&M at 7 because I actually think they beat Texas at the end of the year because they're actually hosting them in Aggieland. And I think
Yeah.
after the last time they had Notre Dame come in there and beat them, I don't think they're dropping another game at home the rest of the year. So I think they beat Texas in that one. That's why they end up 7. Ohio State, I put at 8 because they'll have 2 losses, both of them to Oregon, and that's where you're going to put your 2-loss conference runner-up. Clemson, similar idea, 2-loss conference runner-up, only 1 loss in conference to Miami. I have Indiana making the college football
Ooh.
playoff at 10.
That's
And
what
that's
threw
only
me off. That was a curveball for me.
Yeah, it's a curveball for me too, but I was looking at their schedule and I'm saying there's a possibility they probably lose like that one game to Ohio
Ohio
State
State.
this
Yep.
year.
I agree.
And given the way that that plays out, I don't think they make it to the Big Ten championship game with that one loss. But also, how can you deny a one-loss, third place Power Four conference team a spot in the playoff? So that's why I have them there. And with that same example, that's why I have Penn State at 11. So in this setup with the top 12 teams, the Big Ten gets the most bids into the college football playoff, not the SEC like everyone would think. And then SEC, I have Texas at 12 because they'll have 2 losses in conference. They're probably not going to make the conference championship game. So, oh, sorry. Yeah, they're not going to make the SEC championship game. So there'll be 2 losses, but they've had some great wins on the resume this year. So surprisingly, on both of our lists, Alabama's not in this picture because they're effectively done. I don't have Tennessee on that list because I believe Tennessee's dropping another game, and I believe it's to one of those teams that's making the top 12. So
Yeah.
that's how I seeded my 12. And then the way I have the action working from there, 12 plays 5 first round. So I have Texas beating Notre Dame because even
Yeah.
though they're ranked higher, I think they're a stronger team. And because it's that, 5 through 12 side, these are the first games that are taking place on college campuses. So imagine Notre Dame hosting a college football playoff game. Going to be insanity, and they're going to all leave crying in front of touchdown Jesus because the Aggies are going to take them out.
Be
I
amazing.
have Ohio State over Clemson, not only as the home team in the horseshoe, but also because I just think they're the better team in terms of what Clemson has done this year. Yes, they've trended better, but at the same time, having 2 losses to 2 power conference teams, I just expect Ohio State to be healthy and win that game. In a similar vein, because Boise State's the higher ranked team in my rankings, I have Penn State going to Boise, playing on the Smurf turf for a
Ooh,
first round college football playoff game. So
exciting.
imagine that. Imagine like a thrilling crowd of like 43,000 in Boise, Idaho in December. And Penn State comes in, who's used to playing in the snow. It'll be a whiteout out there, but they still get the job done because they're the higher ranked power conference team. And then I have Texas A&M over Indiana in that first round as well. Going into the quarterfinals, I'm keeping Texas's train rolling. They're beating BYU. Ohio
Ooh.
State is going to get their revenge over Oregon. I have this big one here because in this scenario that I have, how hard is it to beat a team not once, but twice, and now ask them to do it a third time?
Yeah.
Oregon did it in the regular season. They did it in the Big Ten championship game. But to do it a third time is, it's near impossible. The closest thing that we've seen is Miami beating Florida State 3 times in a calendar year, where they did it in the 2003 regular
Yeah.
season, 2004 Orange Bowl, then season opener 2004 regular season.
Yeah.
So I don't think that happens again. Then I have Georgia over Penn State, and I have Miami over Texas A&M. We played them last year. We're going to play them again this year, and that's the way I see that one going. I'm also a homer. We're both Miami fans, as you all can see. The semifinal, I get Ohio State over Texas. So Ohio State, from an 8 seed, makes the national
That's
championship game. They ride
interesting.
that wave over Oregon. And I have Miami over Georgia because if you look at that matchup now, let's be honest, Miami does have some defensive issues, but Georgia is not the most prolific offense, as we've talked about earlier today. They're probably going to have to try to throw the ball to beat us, which very familiar foes at wide receiver at Georgia. And Miami's offense, who's stopping that offense? Not that team. So I have
Yeah.
the final being a rematch of the 2003 Fiesta Bowl later on in the playoff. And I have Miami winning the national championship as a homer over Ohio State.
Yeah, I think that's a great bracket. I thought what was really cool about both of our brackets is the amount of explosive games. I just think the marquee games that we can get out of this, as much as like I was kind of against them expanding it, just because not in the sense that I don't want 12 teams. I think 12 teams is a great number, but it was almost immediate where they were like, oh, 12, now we're going to go to 14 2 years later. And I think that's kind of inevitable what's going to happen. And I don't want to see it blow up to being like March Madness, because I think that's the beauty of college football is that the season actually matters, whereas in college basketball, the season is kind of irrelevant. Um, but I love the marquee matchups that we had, and I what I did not realize was going to play such a factor until we did that story a few weeks ago was the impact of NIL and the transfer portal affecting depth on these teams. Because you got to think, like, again, Ohio State is down two linemen. What are the chances that they get one of them back, even at like 80%, and then can continue to make a run through the
Hmm.
playoffs? Because you're looking at playing at a minimum, even if you get that first week bye, you still got to play 3 games to win a championship. Whereas in years past, you only had to win one, and then when we went to the playoff system, it was two. So it's you think about that, and you're like, man, I wonder how this is going to work out. And you think about them going to a 14 team. I think after this year and maybe one more year, I think the SEC and the Big Ten may rethink that 14, because then you have to add another, you know, um, stage in the playoffs, and I just don't know if teams are going to be able to go that deep for that long without having the depth that they used to have, because a lot of these teams I don't see them being the high if they're a fully functioning like high power offense or defense being the same team in week 10 or 11 as they're going to be in the semis. I think there will
Yeah.
just be it'll just be too much wear and tear on their bodies. But
The one thing I didn't like about this whole expanded 12-team playoff is that I thought they needed to get rid of at least one or two regular season games. Because the fact they're playing 12 regular season games now, plus a conference championship game, and then possibly an additional 2 to 3 college football playoff games, that's insanity for that. Uh, one, for the conditioning, and two, just as you mentioned, their bodies aren't able to take that. It's an NFL schedule at that
it
point.
is an NFL. It is an NFL schedule, and then you're also expected to go to school, which is I don't even know. Like I just think of the logistics, and it makes my head explode and my nose bleed, because I'm just like, how do you get back in time to take exams? Because that's also exam time. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
you're starting a new semester usually in January. Like, how are you getting to class? Like it's beyond me. People who get paid a lot more money are gonna have to figure this out, but we'll be here to watch it. And Rudy, my God, technical difficulties again aside, we have made it through another week. I am excited for this week 10 matchup. We got a nooner. I think I'm going to bring the kids. Will I see you at the game?
Oh, I'll be there. I'll be there hours early tailgating. Gonna get my voting done at like the crack of dawn and go straight to the game. So it'll be a good day.
Kegs and eggs, my friend. You enjoy that. I will just be there for the game.
McMuffins and mimosas.
Ooh, you're fancy. I like
There's a
that.
little bit of trashy and a little bit of classy.
I like that. I like that. Well, thank you everyone for sticking around. Thank you for watching us. Like, comment, and subscribe if you can. Let us know what you thought of our playoff predictions. Let us know what you think. Did we get it? Did we miss it? What do you want? What do you would you like to see? But until next week, be good, y'all. Win the weekend, and as always, go Canes.
Go Canes, bunch of
We'll see you
homers.
guys
We
next week.
got
All
this.
all all the time, baby.